I'm Serena, 21, and last spring break changed my life forever. After my sophomore year at college, I returned home to find an empty house with a for sale sign stuck in the front yard. My entire childhood had been reduced to 3 garbage bags dumped on the back porch. My parents had moved without telling me, without warning. When I finally reached my father by phone, his only response was cold and final. "We've moved, deal with it." That day, I learned what true abandonment feels like. Before I continue with what happened next and how I rebuilt my life from those garbage bags, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, hit that subscribe button, and stay with me for a story about betrayal and rebuilding. Growing up, I believed I had a normal childhood. We lived in a tidy 2-story colonial in a respectable suburb of Philadelphia. My father, Richard, worked as a senior marketing executive for a pharmaceutical company. He wore crisp suits, drove a luxury car, and expected perfection from his family, just as he did from his employees. My mother, Diana, maintained our home with military precision. Everything in its place, every surface gleaming, every meal served on time. She was the quintessential homemaker obsessed with appearances, volunteering for the PTA, and hosting dinner parties where she'd serve elaborate meals while discussing our family's achievements with barely concealed competitiveness. Then there was my younger brother, Jake. 4 years younger than me, he was the golden child, the son my father had always wanted. While I received cold nods for straight A's, Jake got enthusiastic praise for B minuses. His sports trophies occupied the center of our living room mantel, while my academic awards were relegated to a shelf in my bedroom. This wasn't something I recognized as unusual then. It was simply the rhythm of our household, the air I breathed. From my earliest memories, I understood that love in our home was conditional. When I won the 4th grade spelling bee, my parents took the family out for ice cream. When I failed a math quiz in 7th grade, my mother didn't speak to me for 3 days. My father's affection came in the form of brief approving nods when I brought home perfect report cards. It vanished completely when I disappointed him. I learned early that achievement was the currency with which I purchased their attention. I became an exceptional student, not because I loved learning, though I eventually did, but because excellence was my survival strategy. I joined every club, entered every competition, stayed up until 2 in the morning perfecting assignments that my classmates would dash off in an hour. By high school, I was class president, newspaper editor, and valedictorian. My parents displayed my accomplishments like trophies to their friends, though in private, the praise was always tempered with, "But you could have done better, if..." The first major crack in our family facade appeared when I announced my college plans. I'd been accepted to several prestigious universities, including my father's alma mater, where he expected me to major in business or pre-med. Instead, I chose a well-respected liberal arts college with an outstanding creative writing program. I'd been secretly writing stories since I was 12, filling notebooks I kept hidden under my mattress. Writing was my oxygen, the one space where I felt truly free. Creative writing. My father had looked at me as if I'd announced I was joining the circus. "That's not a real degree. That's a hobby." "You can minor in it," my mother suggested, already attempting to smooth over the conflict brewing. "But you should major in something practical, marketing, perhaps, or communications." "I won a full academic scholarship," I countered, thinking this financial aspect would please them. "They only award 5 per year." "We don't need charity." My father snapped through the scholarship had nothing to do with financial need. "We've saved for your education. You're throwing away your potential on something that will never pay the bills." That argument continued for weeks, simmering beneath every conversation until I left for college. I thought distance would help, that they would eventually accept my decision when they saw how passionate I was, how hard I worked. During my freshman year, our calls became less frequent, more stilted. Each conversation circled back to my impractical major, and when I would come to my senses. By Christmas break that first year, the tension had become unbearable. One dinner erupted into a full-blown argument when my father discovered I'd earned an A+ in advanced fiction writing, but a B in economics, the one practical class he'd insisted I take. "This is what we're paying for," he'd shouted, waving my grade report. "For you to waste your time on make-believe while failing at something useful." I didn't fail. "A B is a good grade?" I protested. "Not in this family." My mother interjected, her voice tight. My father's face had turned that dangerous shade of red I'd learned to fear. "If you don't change your major by next semester, we're cutting you off. No more tuition, no more support. See how far your little stories get you then." I'd returned to college after that break with a heaviness in my chest. But I didn't change my major. Something in me had finally rebelled against the conditional love, the constant control. My scholarship covered tuition and partial room and board. I picked up a job at the campus coffee shop to cover the rest. When my parents realized I was serious, the calls became even less frequent. By sophomore year, weeks would pass without any contact. Still, I tried. I sent text updates about my non-writing classes, hoping to find neutral ground. I emailed articles I thought my father might find interesting. I sent my mother birthday cards and called on Sundays, our traditional family phone time. Sometimes they answered their responses increasingly brief and cold. Sometimes they didn't. The last call before spring break had seemed deceptively normal. My mother answered asked perfunctory questions about my classes and reminded me about my upcoming visit home. "We'll see you on the 15th then," she'd said. "Yes, my bus gets in at 4," I confirmed. "Will Dad pick me up at the station like usual?" A pause. "We'll figure something out," she'd replied vaguely. "I have to go now, Serena. I'm running late for my book club." That was it. No warning, no hint of what was coming. Just a mundane conversation that gave no indication it would be one of our last. The day I discovered my family had abandoned me began like any other travel day. I packed light, just a duffel with enough clothes for the week-long spring break. Most of my belongings were still at home in my childhood bedroom, or so I thought. My roommate hugged me goodbye, jealous that I had somewhere to go while she was staying on campus to work. The bus ride from upstate New York to Philadelphia took nearly 4 hours. I spent it alternating between reading a novel for my American literature class and staring out the window, mentally rehearsing how I might improve relations with my parents. Maybe I could emphasize the journalism classes I was taking alongside creative writing. Perhaps I could highlight the internship opportunities that might lead to actual paying jobs. I was determined to find some common ground to ease the growing tension. When the bus pulled into Philadelphia, I was surprised not to see my father's silver Audi waiting. He was usually punctual to a fault, often arriving places 30 minutes early. I checked my phone. No messages. I called my parents' numbers, but both went straight to voicemail. Strange, but not alarming. Perhaps they'd gotten their wires crossed about the pickup time. I caught the local train to our suburb, then walked the mile from the station to our neighborhood, my duffel growing heavier with each step. It was a pleasant spring day, cherry blossoms just beginning to open along the tree-lined streets. As I turned onto our block, I noticed subtle changes. The Miller's house had been repainted. The Johnsons had added a new fence. Everything looked familiar, yet slightly different, as if I were seeing it through the wrong prescription glasses. Then I saw our house, or rather, what had been our house. The carefully manicured lawn was the same, but something was off. The curtains were missing from the windows, and there planted in the front yard was a large red and white sign, "For sale, luxury family home." I stopped dead in my tracks, convinced I'd somehow walked to the wrong house. But no, this was 1427 Maple Avenue. This was our address. These were our maple trees that my father had obsessively trimmed each fall. This was our front porch where we'd pose for Christmas card photos every year. I checked the house number again, thinking I'd made a mistake. But the brass numbers confirmed what I couldn't process, 1-427. I approached slowly, as if the house might suddenly transform back into the familiar home I expected. Through the bare windows, I could see empty rooms. No furniture, no pictures on the walls. Nothing. My heart pounding, I walked up the driveway to the back of the house where we always entered through the kitchen door. That's when I saw them 3 large black garbage bags sitting on the back porch. Someone had written Serena in black marker across each one. With trembling hands, I tore open the first bag. Inside were clothes hastily shoved together. Some of my winter sweaters, jeans, a few t-shirts. The second bag contained books, their spines cracked from the way they'd been carelessly stuffed in. My collection of classic novels, my writing journals, my high school yearbooks, all jumbled together. The third bag held random items from my bedroom. My alarm clock, some framed photos, the stuffed bear I'd had since childhood, now missing one eye. At the bottom, I found a broken picture frame containing my high school diploma. The glass shattered. I sat down hard on the porch steps, the broken frame in my hands, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. My entire childhood had been reduced to 3 garbage bags tossed out like Monday's trash. Important things were missing. My birth certificate, my social security card, my passport. The expensive laptop my grandmother had given me for high school graduation. The jewelry box containing the pearl earrings for my 16th birthday. Gone. As the reality of the situation slowly penetrated my shock, I became aware of being watched. Mrs. Richards from next door was standing in her yard watering plants, but clearly observing me. The Collins family across the street had paused their driveway basketball game to stare. I felt like an intruder at what had been my own home. "Serena, is that you, dear?" An elderly voice broke through my daze. Mrs. Peterson, who lived 2 doors down, was walking toward me, concern etched on her kind face. She had always baked me cookies when I was little, had attended my high school graduation, when my own grandmother was too ill to come. "Mrs. Peterson," I managed to say, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "Where are my parents? What's happening?" Her face crumpled with sympathy. "Oh, my dear girl. You don't know, do you?" She sat beside me on the porch steps, her arthritis making the movement slow and painful. She placed a weathered hand over mine. "They moved away, Serena, about 2 weeks ago. A moving company came, and then they drove off in 2 cars packed with boxes." 2 weeks, I whispered. "But they knew I was coming home today." My mother confirmed it. Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened. "They told everyone you knew, that you had decided to stay at college for break. Richard told the neighbors you weren't interested in coming to the new house." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Not only had they moved without telling me, but they had lied to everyone, making it seem like I had chosen this separation. "Where did they go?" I asked. "Florida, I believe. Richard mentioned a job transfer. It all happened very quickly." I fumbled for my phone, my fingers numb as I dialed my father's number again. Voicemail. My mother's number. Voicemail. My brother's number. Voicemail. As the sun began to set, reality set in. I was homeless. The dorms were closed for break. I had exactly $78 in my bank account, enough for a bus ticket back to college, but nowhere to stay when I got there. I had no access to my important documents, and my family had disappeared. Mrs. Peterson insisted I come home with her. "You can stay in my guest room tonight and we'll figure things out in the morning," she said firmly. "No one should be alone after a shock like this." I was helping her carry my garbage bags to her house when my phone finally rang. My father's name flashed on the screen. I answered immediately, my heart racing. "Dad!" "What's going on? Where are you guys?" His voice came through cold and distant, as if he were speaking to a telemarketer, not his daughter. "We've moved to Tampa. The house is on the market." "Why didn't you tell me? I came home for break and—" "We decided it was best to make a clean break," he interrupted. "You've made your choices, Serena. We've made ours." "What choices? What are you talking about?" My voice rose with panic and confusion. "You chose your so-called writing career over your family's wishes. You chose to reject our values. So we chose to move on." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You abandoned me because of my college major. You left my things in garbage bags and sold our house because I want to be a writer." "Deal with it," he said flatly. "You're an adult now. You wanted independence. You've got it." The line went dead. I stood in Mrs. Peterson's driveway, phone still pressed to my ear, as the magnitude of what had happened crashed over me. My family hadn't just moved without telling me. They had deliberately abandoned me, left me with no home, no resources, and 3 garbage bags of cast-offs. For the first time, I understood what it truly meant to be alone in the world. Mrs. Peterson's guest room was small but comfortable, decorated in floral patterns that had probably been stylish 30 years ago. I lay awake all night staring at the ceiling, my mind unable to process the seismic shift in my reality. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's name on my phone screen, heard his cold voice telling me to deal with it. My body felt like it belonged to someone else. Shaky, nauseous skin, hypersensitive. I recognized the symptoms of shock from a psychology class I'd taken. That strange, detached feeling like I was watching myself from a distance. The inability to think clearly, the physical tremors. Morning came, and with it no relief. Mrs. Peterson made me toast and eggs that I couldn't eat. She sat across from me at her kitchen table, her face lined with worry. "They told everyone they were moving because Richard got a wonderful job opportunity," she said, pouring me tea I wouldn't drink. "Said it all happened very suddenly." But Serena, they'd been packing for weeks. This wasn't sudden. The realization that they had been planning this abandonment while still talking to me normally, while confirming my spring break visit, sent a fresh wave of nausea through me. "They mentioned you'd be staying at school focusing on your studies," she continued. "No one questioned it. Why would we parents don't just leave their children?" But mine had. And apparently they'd been methodical about it. I spent that morning making desperate calls. First to my extended family, my father's brother in Boston, my mother's sister in Chicago. Both expressed shock, neither offered help. They seemed uncomfortable, eager to get off the phone, as if my abandonment might be contagious. I wondered what stories my parents had already told them. Next, I tried finding Jake through social media. His Instagram showed recent posts, pictures of a new house with palm trees, a swimming pool, a bedroom much larger and nicer than his old one. He was smiling in the photos, no sign of distress about leaving his old life behind, or about leaving me. I sent him a direct message, "Jake, what's going on? Why didn't anyone tell me you were moving? Please call me." Hours later, his response appeared. "Mom and Dad said you chose this, that you didn't want to be part of the family anymore, that you knew about the move but decided to stay away." My parents had turned my own brother against me. I typed frantically trying to explain, but he didn't respond to my subsequent messages. The practical problems began piling up immediately. I discovered my cell phone would soon be disconnected. I'd been on my parents' family plan, which they'd apparently canceled. My health insurance, which had been through my father's work, was also in jeopardy. And most pressingly, I had nowhere to go. The college dorms were closed until the following Sunday. Mrs. Peterson, bless her heart, insisted I stay with her until I figured things out. "I have plenty of room," she said firmly, "and I could use the company." Her kindness made me weep. That a neighbor I saw only occasionally showed more care than my own parents was both comforting and devastating. She also helped me take practical steps. She drove me to the local bank branch where I discovered my parents had removed themselves from my checking account, the one they'd opened with me when I was 16. Fortunately, they hadn't been able to empty it since it was in my name, but the $78 wouldn't get me far. Mrs. Peterson connected me with her son, a lawyer in Philadelphia, who gave me free advice by phone. I would need to get new copies of my birth certificate and social security card. I should establish my own cell phone plan as soon as possible. I should contact my college's financial aid office immediately to explain my situation. "You may qualify for emergency assistance," he explained, "and you'll need to file as an independent student on future financial aid forms." My friend Taylor called that evening in response to my increasingly desperate texts. Without hesitation, she offered her family's home for the remainder of spring break. "My parents already said it's fine," she insisted. "We live in Albany, so you can take the bus up tomorrow and stay with us until dorms reopen." I accepted, relief washing over me at having a plan, however temporary. Before leaving Mrs. Peterson's the next day, I returned to what had been my home. The realtor had scheduled an open house, and I wanted one last look before strangers tramped through the rooms of my childhood. Mrs. Peterson accompanied me, her protective presence giving me courage. The house was staged now with rental furniture, making it look like a model home, impersonal and perfect. No sign remained of the family that had lived there for 18 years, no mark of my existence. As we turned to leave, the realtor approached, clipboard in hand. "Are you interested in the property?" she asked brightly. "I used to live here," I said, my voice hollow. Her smile faltered. "Oh, you must be, she consulted her clipboard. "The daughter your parents mentioned you might stop by for some remaining belongings." So they had planned for this possibility, had instructed the realtor about me. The calculated nature of their abandonment made it somehow worse. "I've already collected my things," I said, not adding that they'd been stuffed into garbage bags like waste. On the bus to Taylor's, I cried silently behind large sunglasses, my face turned toward the window, so other passengers wouldn't notice. I wasn't just crying for my lost home or possessions. I was grieving the death of the family I thought I had. Imperfect, often cold, but still my family. Now I understood they had always been a mirage, a performance of family without the substance of love. By the time I arrived in Albany, exhaustion had replaced tears. Taylor was waiting at the bus station, her familiar freckled face and wild red hair a beacon of normalcy in my shattered world. She hugged me tightly without asking questions, helped carry my sad garbage bags to her car, and drove me to the modest home where she lived with her parents and younger sister. Walking into Taylor's house that evening was like entering a foreign country. Her mother hugged me immediately, a real hug, warm and enveloping, not the stiff formal embraces my mother had occasionally bestowed. Her father asked if I was hungry, and actually waited for my answer before piling a plate with homemade lasagna. They didn't interrogate me about grades or achievements or future plans. They simply welcomed me, fed me, and showed me to their spare room where clean towels and extra toiletries had already been laid out. That night, in a strange bed in a strange house, I finally slept. The kindness of Taylor's family, of Mrs. Peterson, of relative strangers, became a lifeline pulling me from the darkest waters of abandonment towards something I couldn't yet name as hope. Returning to college after spring break should have felt like coming home, but instead it highlighted everything I had lost. Other students chatted about family dinners, hometown friends, and care packages from parents. They complained good-naturedly about mothers who asked too many questions or fathers who gave unwanted advice. Each casual conversation was a reminder of what had been taken from me. I threw myself into survival mode. The day after dorms reopened, I went to the financial aid office and explained my situation to a counselor named Ms. Rivera. Her eyes widened as I recounted discovering the empty house, but she didn't interrupt. "Unfortunately, this happens more often than you'd think," she said when I finished. "Not usually in such a dramatic way, but parents abandoning financial responsibility for college students who don't meet their expectations. We see it several times a year." She helped me fill out forms for emergency assistance and explained how to apply for independent student status for future financial aid. The process was invasive, requiring documentation that I was truly on my own. "They'll want proof that you've been abandoned," she explained. "Bank statements showing you're financially independent, evidence that you're not on their tax returns as a dependent, maybe even statements from third parties who can verify your situation." It felt like having to prove my own worthiness to exist. As if being discarded by my parents wasn't traumatic enough, I now had to document that abandonment in clinical detail to qualify for help. The next stop was the campus employment office, where I signed up for every job opening available. In addition to my existing position at the coffee shop, I took on work in the library, became a note taker for students with disabilities, and started tutoring freshman English. My schedule became a jigsaw puzzle of classes and jobs, with study time squeezed into the cracks between. A meeting with my academic advisor led to a referral to campus mental health services. I was reluctant. I didn't have time for therapy with my new work schedule, and part of me felt I should be able to handle this on my own. But when I found myself standing in the shower fully clothed one morning, having completely forgotten I was still dressed, I realized I needed help. Dr. Winters, a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, became my anchor during those first turbulent months. In her small office, with its overstuffed armchairs and shelves of books, I began to process what had happened. "What you're experiencing is trauma," she explained during our second session. "Your symptoms, the forgetfulness, the difficulty concentrating, the emotional numbness alternating with overwhelming feelings, these are normal responses to an abnormal situation." She helped me understand that grief wasn't just for death. It was also for loss of family, of security, of the basic assumption that parents don't abandon their children over college majors. "You're mourning not just what you've lost, but what you never really had. Unconditional love from your parents," she said. The practical challenges were relentless. Getting a new birth certificate required my driver's license and a notarized request form plus fees I could barely afford. Replacing my Social Security card meant hours at the Social Security office. Opening a new bank account, setting up a basic cell phone plan, finding affordable health insurance. Each task was a reminder of how much I had taken for granted. Taylor's family continued to be a lifeline. They sent care packages with homemade cookies, gift cards for groceries, and handwritten notes of encouragement. Mrs. Peterson forwarded any mail that came to the old house and kept me updated on its sale. The house sold quickly, erasing another connection to my past. The physical toll of stress and overwork soon became apparent. I lost 15 pounds in the first month, my clothes hanging loose on my shrinking frame. Dark circles became permanent features under my eyes. My focus scattered, making reading assignments that once took me an hour stretch into 3 or 4. I caught every cold that circulated through campus, my immune system weakened by lack of sleep and constant anxiety. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to stabilize. My financial aid was adjusted, providing enough to cover my essential needs. My multiple jobs kept me afloat, though, just barely. And the campus community stepped up in unexpected ways. My creative writing professor, Dr. Abernathy, noticed my declining participation in class and asked me to stay after one day. When I haltingly explained my situation, he immediately offered his department's resources. "We have a hardship fund for students in the writing program," he said, "and I can connect you with alumni who might have summer internship opportunities with housing included." The director of residential life, upon hearing about my situation from Ms. Rivera, offered me a position as a summer resident assistant. The job came with a free room in the one dorm that remained open during summer break, solving my immediate housing crisis. These small acts of kindness became stepping stones across the river of abandonment, each one a firm place to stand before moving to the next. One morning in late April, About 6 weeks after my discovery at the empty house, I received an unexpected email from my Aunt Meredith, my father's sister. We had never been close. She lived in Oregon and visited only every few years. But her message shocked me nonetheless. Serena, I've just heard from your father about your situation. He says you've chosen to cut ties with the family because of disagreements over your education. Is this true? It doesn't sound like you, but I wanted to hear your side before making judgments. I stared at my laptop screen, hands hovering over the keyboard. So this was the narrative my father had created, that I had abandoned them, not the other way around. It was such a complete inversion of reality that for a moment I questioned my own memories. Had I somehow misunderstood what happened? Was I the one who had broken ties? Then I remembered the garbage bags, the for sale sign, the cold voice saying, "Deal with it." No, there was no misinterpreting that. I crafted a careful response to my aunt, stating the facts without emotional language. I described coming home to find the house empty, my belongings in garbage bags, and my discovery that my family had moved to Florida without telling me. I explained that I hadn't cut ties. My parents had changed their phone numbers, and my brother wasn't responding to messages. Her reply came the next day. "I'm stunned. This doesn't match what Richard told us at all. He said you refused to come home for spring break, that you told them you wanted nothing more to do with the family because they questioned your major. I find it hard to believe my brother would do what you're describing, but I also can't imagine why you would make this up." It was validation of sorts, but also further evidence of how thoroughly my parents had worked to control the narrative. They hadn't just abandoned me physically, they were actively trying to erase me from the family story, recasting me as the villain rather than the victim. Around the same time, I discovered something else disturbing. My college fund was empty. I'd never had direct access to it. My parents had set it up when I was born, and they controlled the account. But I'd always known it existed, had been told it contained enough for 4 years at a state university. With my new independent status, I needed to account for all potential financial resources on aid forms. When I contacted the bank that held the account, they informed me that the entire balance had been withdrawn 2 months earlier, right before my parents moved. They had taken my college fund. Money that had been explicitly saved for my education was gone, likely used to finance their new life in Florida. The betrayal cut deep, adding financial theft to emotional abandonment. My lawyer friend, Mrs. Peterson's son, advised me that I might have legal recourse depending on how the account had been structured. But pursuing it would mean taking my parents to court, a lengthy, expensive process with no guaranteed outcome, and one that would require continuing contact with the very people who had discarded me. I wasn't sure I had the emotional strength for that battle. Not yet. Maybe not ever. As spring semester ended, I faced the reality that I was now truly on my own. No home to return to for summer break. No family support system. Just me, my determination, and the surprising network of support I'd begun to build from the ashes of abandonment. The first summer after being abandoned was a masterclass in survival. As a resident assistant in the half-empty summer dorm, I had a roof over my head, a tiny single room with institutional furniture, but my own space nonetheless. I worked 3 jobs: mornings at the campus coffee shop, afternoons at the library, and weekends waiting tables at a local restaurant where the tips helped supplement my meager income. Every penny was accounted for, every expense questioned. Do I really need that? Can I make this last longer? Is there a cheaper alternative? My budget allowed for no extras, no spontaneous purchases, no small luxuries that most college students took for granted. I continued therapy with Dr. Winters, though less frequently due to my work schedule. Our sessions focused on processing the abandonment and recognizing the dysfunctional patterns that had characterized my family long before they left me with those garbage bags. "What your parents did was extreme," she explained, "but the dynamics that led to it were present all along. The conditional love, the control through financial support, the emotional manipulation. You were living with these unhealthy patterns your entire life." Through therapy, memories resurfaced that took on new meaning. The time my father didn't speak to me for a week because I got a B+ on a history test. My mother's passive-aggressive comments about my appearance whenever I chose comfort over style. The way they pitted Jake and me against each other, rewarding him for athletic achievements while demanding academic perfection from me. I began to see that what I'd lost wasn't a healthy family. It was the illusion of one. The parents who abandoned me were showing their true selves, not becoming different people. The realization was both painful and freeing. Dr. Winters introduced me to the concept of writing as therapy, encouraging me to document my experiences and feelings in a journal. Initially resistant, I was a fiction writer, not a diarist. I eventually found the process cathartic. Late at night, exhausted from working and studying, I would fill pages with memories, questions, anger, grief, and occasionally hope. Those journal entries gradually evolved into something more structured. With Dr. Abernathy's encouragement, I began shaping my experiences into essays, exploring family dynamics, abandonment, and resilience. I wrote about finding my belongings in garbage bags, about building a life without a safety net, about redefining family through the connections I was forming. "This is powerful work, Serena," Dr. Abernathy said after reading one particularly raw piece. "You're transforming pain into art. That's what real writers do." His words validated not just my writing, but my choice of major, the very choice that had triggered my parents' abandonment. There was a bitter irony in having my creative writing skills become essential to processing the trauma caused by pursuing creative writing. As the summer progressed, I began receiving occasional messages from extended family members who had heard different versions of what had happened. Some believed my parents' narrative that I had cut them off. Others expressed vague sympathy without offering actual support. A few, like my Aunt Meredith, seemed genuinely concerned about the truth. "Your father is telling everyone you've had some kind of breakdown," she wrote in one email, "that you've rejected the family and are spreading lies because you're unstable. I don't believe him, but many in the family do. Would you be willing to talk to me directly? I'd like to understand what really happened." We arranged a video call during which I calmly recounted the events of spring break, showing her pictures of the garbage bags, screenshots of my father's number being disconnected, and the email from my college notifying me that my tuition payment method had been canceled without replacement. Meredith's face grew increasingly troubled as I presented my evidence. "This is... I don't even have words," she finally said. "I knew my brother could be cold, but this is beyond anything I imagined." "Why would they do this?" I asked the question that had haunted me for months. "Over a college major?" "It doesn't make sense." She was quiet for a moment. "Richard has always needed absolute control," she said carefully. "Our father was the same way. When we were children, Dad would give gifts and then take them away if we disappointed him in any way. He'd promised Richard a car for graduation, then sold it when Richard chose State University instead of Dad's alma mater." The parallel to my situation was chilling. "I think when you chose your own path, it triggered something in Richard," she continued. "He couldn't control you, so he discarded you just as our father would have done." This glimpse into intergenerational trauma helped me understand, though it didn't excuse what my parents had done. My father had replicated the very emotional abuse he had experienced, perpetuating the cycle. Meredith offered to help financially, but I hesitated to accept. What if that support came with strings attached just as my parents had? What if it was withdrawn the moment I didn't meet her expectations? "I understand your caution," she said when I expressed these fears. "How about this? I'll contribute to a fund at your college in your name. The money will be there if you need it, but I'll have no direct control over it. No conditions attached." Her understanding of my need for independence for support without control brought tears to my eyes. Here was a family member who actually saw me. As summer turned to fall, I began my junior year with a clearer sense of purpose. I was no longer just surviving. I was beginning to build a life on my terms. My jobs continued, my grades remained excellent despite my work schedule, and my writing had found a focus that professors praised for its authenticity and insight. I started a small support group for other students who had been cut off by family, a surprising number as it turned out. Some for coming out as LGBTQ+, others for choosing impractical majors like mine, still others for dating someone their parents disapproved of. We met weekly in a quiet corner of the campus center, sharing strategies for financial independence and emotional healing. It was through this group that I met Marco, a senior who had been disowned by his conservative father for studying environmental science, instead of joining the family oil business. His experience mirrored mine in many ways, though his abandonment had been less sudden, more a gradual cutting of ties. "The hardest part," he told me during one meeting, "is seeing friends go home for holidays knowing you don't have that option anymore. That first Thanksgiving alone nearly broke me." I hadn't yet faced a major holiday alone, but as November approached, his words echoed in my mind. What would I do for Thanksgiving? For winter break when the dorms closed? The questions loomed threatening the stability I'd worked so hard to establish. Taylor's family again provided an answer, insisting I join them for Thanksgiving. "You're basically family now," Taylor's mother said when she called to extend the invitation. "We'd be heartbroken if you weren't with us." The concept of chosen family began to take concrete form in my life. The people who showed up, who offered support without conditions, who made space for me at their tables. They were becoming my true family in all the ways that mattered. Still, I couldn't deny the lingering pain of rejection by those who should have loved me most. As I approached the 6-month mark of being abandoned, I received an unexpected email from my brother Jake. It was brief and cautious. "Serena, I'm confused about what happened. Mom and Dad don't talk about you anymore. But when they do, their story doesn't add up. Can we talk?" My heart raced as I read his message. Jake, who had been thoroughly convinced of my alleged betrayal, was questioning the narrative. The brother I had grown up with, who I had helped with homework and defended from bullies despite our parents' favoritism, might be finding his way back to me. I suggested meeting at a coffee shop in Philadelphia Neutral Ground, halfway between his new home in New Jersey. They hadn't moved to Florida after all. Another lie. And my college. The plan was set for the following weekend, a rare day off from my various jobs. The anticipation of seeing Jake, of possibly reconnecting with at least one family member, filled me with both hope and anxiety. What if he still believed their lies? What if this was some kind of trap? What if I was setting myself up for another heartbreak? Dr. Winters helped me prepare emotionally for the meeting, reminding me to maintain boundaries while remaining open to genuine reconnection. "Remember, he's been living with their manipulation this whole time," she cautioned. "He may be confused, angry, or still partially under their influence." The morning of our meeting, I dressed carefully in clothes that projected confidence and stability. Not the struggling student working multiple jobs to survive, but the strong young woman building a new life from scratch. My armor for what promised to be an emotional battlefield. When I walked into the coffee shop and saw Jake sitting at a corner table, his lanky frame hunched over his phone, I nearly turned and fled. He looked so much like our father that for a moment all my wounds felt fresh again. But then he looked up, his expression uncertain, vulnerable, so unlike my father's usual confidence. "Serena," he said, standing awkwardly. "You look different." I was different. Abandonment changes a person. 6 months of struggling for survival, of questioning everything I thought I knew about family and love, had transformed me in ways both visible and invisible. But as I sat across from my brother, searching his familiar yet changed face, I recognized that he too had been damaged by our parents' actions. He hadn't been abandoned as I had, but he had been manipulated, lied to, used as a pawn in their game of erasure. We were both victims of the same dysfunctional family system, just in different ways. And in that recognition, I found the beginning of a path forward, not just for surviving abandonment, but for transforming it into something that might someday resemble healing. The coffee shop meeting with Jake marked a turning point in my journey. Sitting across from my brother, now 17, gangly and awkward in that distinctly teenage way, I saw the confusion in his eyes, the struggle between the narrative our parents had fed him and the reality he was beginning to glimpse. "I don't understand what happened," he said after we'd exchanged stilted pleasantries. "Mom and Dad said you chose to stay at college, that you didn't want to be part of the family anymore because we questioned your major." "Jake, that's not what happened." I kept my voice steady despite the familiar pain flaring. "I came home for spring break as planned. The house was empty with a for sale sign. My belongings were in garbage bags on the porch. No one told me you were moving." He stared at me, eyes widening. That's not possible. They wouldn't do that." I took out my phone and showed him the photos I'd taken that day. The empty house, the for sale sign, the garbage bags with my name scrawled across them. His face paled as he swiped through the evidence. "But why would they lie to me?" His voice cracked suddenly, sounding much younger than his 17 years. "Because the truth makes them look bad," I said gently. "It's easier to say I abandoned the family than admit they abandoned me." Over the next hour, Jake described how our parents had abruptly announced they were moving to New Jersey, not Florida, as they'd initially claimed. They had enrolled him in a new school with a strong sports program and bought a larger house in an upscale neighborhood. When he asked about me, they said I had chosen to cut ties with the family. "At first I didn't believe them," he admitted. "But they showed me texts they said were from you, saying you wanted nothing to do with us." My stomach churned. "They faked texts from me?" Jake nodded miserably. "I guess they did. I should have known." They didn't sound like you. He explained that our parents had become increasingly controlling of his communication, monitoring his social media and phone. He had created a secret email account to contact me using a friend's computer, since his own devices were regularly checked. They threatened to take away my car if they caught me talking to you, he said. Said you were a bad influence, that you'd try to turn me against them. Their manipulation was even more extensive than I had realized. They hadn't just discarded me. They were actively working to prevent any connection between their children. Are you okay? I asked, suddenly worried about his safety in that household. He shrugged. I guess. Dad's pushing me toward business schools even though I'm only a junior. Mom's the same as always, focused on appearances. They bought me a car for my birthday, but they hold it over my head whenever I don't do exactly what they want. The familiar pattern was continuing with Jake, now experiencing the conditional love I had endured. But unlike me, he had seen the consequences of defiance. He had witnessed what happened when you crossed our parents' expectations. I miss you, he said suddenly, his voice small. I didn't know if anything they said was true, but I knew I missed my sister. Those simple words healed something in me that I hadn't realized was still broken. Despite everything our parents had done to separate us, the bond between siblings remained. We agreed to stay in contact through his secret email, finding ways to maintain our relationship despite our parents' efforts. It would be complicated. He was still a minor living under their roof, subject to their control, but it was a connection worth fighting for. As we parted, Jake hugged me tightly. I'm sorry, he whispered, for believing them, for not reaching out sooner. You're reaching out now, I replied. That's what matters. Reconnecting with Jake was both healing and complicated. I worried about putting him in a difficult position with our parents, about them discovering our communication and punishing him. But I also recognized how important it was for both of us to maintain our sibling relationship, independent of our parents' toxic influence. Around this same time, I received an unexpected call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, I heard my mother's voice for the first time in nearly 7 months. Serena, she said, her tone artificially bright, as if we'd spoken just yesterday. How are you, darling? The casual greeting after such profound abandonment left me momentarily speechless. When I found my voice, it was surprisingly steady. What do you want, Mom? Don't be like that, she chided as if I were being unreasonable. I'm calling because your father and I think it's time we cleared the air. There's been a lot of misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, I repeated. You left my belongings in garbage bags and moved without telling me. What part of that did I misunderstand? Her voice hardened slightly. You chose to abandon your family, Serena. You chose that writing program over our wishes. We simply responded to your choice. It was a stunning revision of reality. Not just a lie, but a complete inversion of the truth. In her version, I was the one who had abandoned them, not the other way around. That's not what happened, I said firmly. I have photos of the empty house, the garbage bags. I have witnesses who saw you move without telling me. You're exaggerating as usual, she said dismissively. We simply downsized after you made it clear you didn't want to be part of this family anymore. You never called, never visited. I called every week, I interrupted. I came home for every break until you moved without telling me. You changed your phone numbers. You took my college fund. There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice had that dangerously calm quality I remembered from childhood confrontations. I think you need help, Serena. You're not remembering things correctly. Your father and I are concerned about your mental state. The gaslighting was so blatant it was almost laughable. Almost. Instead, it filled me with a quiet rage. They had abandoned me, stolen from me, lied about me to family and friends, and now were trying to convince me that none of it had happened the way I experienced it. I'm not having this conversation, I said. I know what happened. So do you. We want to help you, she persisted. We're willing to bring you back into the family if you'll get the help you need. Change to a more appropriate major. See a therapist we've selected. I already have a therapist, I cut in, and she's helped me understand exactly what kind of family dynamics I grew up with. I don't need your version of help. Don't be difficult, Serena. We're offering you a chance to come home. The conditional nature of the offer was clear. I could come home if I conformed to their expectations, if I accepted their fictional account of events, if I essentially erased my own reality to adopt theirs. That's not a home, I said. That's a prison with nicer furniture. I ended the call, my hands shaking, but my resolve stronger than ever. I recognized what they were doing. the manipulation, the reality distortion, the attempt to regain control. A year earlier, I might have capitulated, might have been so desperate for their approval that I'd have accepted their twisted version of events. But not anymore. That call clarified something important. I wasn't just building a new life out of necessity. I was choosing a healthier path than the one my parents offered. Their love came with conditions I was no longer willing to accept. I reported the conversation to Dr. Winters at our next session. She nodded thoughtfully as I recounted the gaslighting, the conditional offer of reconciliation. What you just experienced is common in families with narcissistic dynamics, she explained. When they realize their abandonment didn't break you, that you're surviving and even thriving without them, they needed to reassert control. But notice what they offered: not an apology, not acknowledgement of what they did, but a chance for you to return to the fold on their terms. They wanted me to admit I was wrong, I said, to say I abandoned them when they were the ones who left me. Exactly. They need their version of reality to be the only acceptable one. Your independence threatens that. The insight was powerful. By surviving their abandonment, by building a life on my own terms, I had inadvertently challenged their control. My existence, stable, determined, increasingly confident, was itself a refutation of their narrative. This understanding shifted something fundamental in my healing process. I began to see my independence not just as a necessary response to abandonment, but as a form of liberation from a family system that had been harmful all along. What had felt like punishment was in some ways an opportunity to build a life free from their manipulative influence. As my junior year progressed, this perspective infused my writing with new energy and purpose. I crafted essays exploring the complex emotions of family estrangement, the grief alongside relief, the loss alongside discovery. Dr. Abernathy encouraged me to submit one particularly powerful piece to a national literary journal. "This isn't just therapeutic writing anymore," he said. "This is important work that could help others in similar situations." When the journal accepted my essay for publication, it felt like vindication of the very path my parents had rejected. My choice of creative writing, the choice that had triggered their abandonment, was proving its value not in the monetary terms they would have measured, but in the meaning it created from pain. The publication led to unexpected connections with others who had experienced family estrangement. Emails arrived from readers who saw their own stories reflected in mine, who found comfort in knowing they weren't alone in their experience. Some had been disowned for their sexual orientation, others for their choice of partner, still others for pursuing careers their parents disapproved of. Their messages confirmed what I had begun to suspect. Family estrangement was far more common than most people realized, but remained shrouded in shame and silence. By sharing my experience publicly, I was helping break that silence. When the literary journal published my essay, I had a moment of panic. What if my parents read it? What if they sued me for defamation? What if they retaliated in some way? Dr. Winters helped me work through these fears. "You've told your truth," she reminded me. "You haven't named them. You haven't fabricated events. You've simply shared your authentic experience." Still, I braced for potential fallout. None came. Either they didn't see the essay or they chose not to engage with my public telling of our story. Whatever the reason, I was grateful for the silence. It allowed me to continue the work of rebuilding without new wounds being inflicted. As my junior year ended, I faced the summer with more options than I'd had the previous year. I'd secured an internship at a small publishing house in the city, arranged for summer housing with 2 other students, and even had a modest emergency fund thanks to my Aunt Meredith's contribution and my own careful saving. I was no longer in pure survival mode. I was building a future. The anniversary of my abandonment passed with less pain than I had anticipated. I marked the day quietly writing a letter to my past self, the shocked, devastated young woman standing on that empty porch with garbage bags at her feet. I told her she would survive this, that she would find strength she didn't know she possessed, that a year later, she would be not just surviving, but beginning to thrive. What had been the worst day of my life had become, in retrospect, the beginning of something valuable: true independence, authentic relationships, and a hard-won understanding of my own resilience. 2 years after finding my home empty and my belongings in garbage bags, I stood in my graduation robe, diploma in hand, scanning the audience. Where most students had clusters of family members cheering, I had my chosen family, Taylor and her parents, who had driven 4 hours to be there, Mrs. Peterson now using a cane but determined to attend. Marco and other friends from my support group, Dr. Abernathy and Dr. Winters, whose guidance had been instrumental in my journey. The empty seats where biological family should have been no longer felt like wounds. They were simply spaces filled by people who had earned their place in my life through consistent love and support. Jake had wanted to come, but couldn't risk our parents' wrath. He was still financially dependent on them now in his freshman year at the business school our father had selected. We maintained our secret communication, and I'd even managed to meet him twice more in person when he could create plausible excuses for trips to Philadelphia. His 18th birthday was approaching, and with it a measure of legal independence that might allow our relationship to become less clandestine. As I moved my tassel from right to left, officially marking my transition from student to graduate, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This achievement, graduating with honors in creative writing, was entirely mine. I had worked multiple jobs, navigated bureaucratic obstacles, processed trauma, and still maintained academic excellence. No one could claim credit for this success but me. The graduation ceremony was followed by a small celebration at a local restaurant paid for by Taylor's parents, despite my protests. "You're family now," Taylor's mother insisted, hugging me tightly, and families celebrate achievements together. Their ongoing acceptance and support had been a lifeline throughout my college years. They had provided a place to stay during breaks, sent care packages during finals, and never once made me feel like a charity case. They had shown me what family should be: supportive without being controlling, loving without conditions. My post-graduation plans were taking shape in ways that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier. The publishing internship I had held the previous summer had turned into a job offer, an editorial assistant position at a respected publishing house in New York. The salary wasn't impressive, but it was enough to share an apartment with two other recent graduates in Brooklyn. I had applied for and received a small grant for emerging writers, which would provide some additional financial cushion during my transition to professional life. And my second published essay had attracted the attention of a literary agent who encouraged me to consider expanding my writing into a memoir. "Your story resonates with people," she told me during our initial call. "There's a book here, Serena, a powerful one." The idea of transforming my painful experience into a book that might help others was appealing though daunting. Could I revisit that trauma in the depth required for a full manuscript? Was I ready to share my story on that scale? These were questions I was still considering as graduation day arrived. The apartment I shared with roommates in Brooklyn was tiny. My bedroom barely fit a twin bed and small desk. But it was mine. I had signed the lease, passed the credit check, a minor miracle, given my limited credit history, and furnished it with a mix of thrift store finds and items purchased slowly, carefully, as my budget allowed. Every piece of furniture, every dish and lamp and bookshelf represented independence. These weren't items given conditionally to be taken away if I failed to meet someone else's expectations. They were manifestations of my own choices, my own efforts. My job at the publishing house was entry-level but engaging. I read manuscript submissions, wrote reader reports, and assisted two editors with their projects. The work was demanding, but fulfilled my love of literature and writing. For the first time, I could see a clear career path ahead, one that aligned with my passions rather than someone else's expectations. In the evenings and on weekends, I worked on my own writing. The memoir idea had taken root, and I was slowly assembling chapters working through the complex emotions of abandonment and rebuilding with the distance that time and healing had provided. Jake visited my Brooklyn apartment during his spring break of sophomore year, having told our parents he was staying with a friend from business school. At 19, he was finding small ways to establish independence while still maintaining the facade of the obedient son. "They never talk about you," he told me as we sat on my small balcony watching the sunset over the city skyline. "It's like you never existed. They've removed all the family photos that had you in them." The revelation stung despite the time that had passed. Being erased from family history was its own kind of violence. "Sometimes I think they're afraid," he continued. "Afraid that if they acknowledge what they did to you, they'd have to face what kind of people they really are." His insight surprised me. In the years since our reconnection, Jake had matured, developing a perspective on our parents that was both compassionate and clear-eyed. "Are you okay there?" I asked. "Living with them." He shrugged. "I'm playing their game until I don't have to anymore. Getting the business degree following their rules, but making my own plans for after graduation." He smiled wryly. "I learned from your experience. I'm building my exit strategy quietly. I felt a mix of pride and concern. Pride in his resilience and insight, concern about the emotional toll of living a double life. But Jake had seen firsthand the consequences of open defiance. His more strategic approach made sense. Just remember, you always have a place with me, I told him, whenever you need it. It was a promise I could now keep having established a stable, independent life. I could offer my brother the safety net our parents had withdrawn from me. About 2.5 years after my abandonment, I received another unexpected call from my mother. These calls came sporadically, perhaps twice a year, and always followed the same pattern. She would act as if nothing significant had happened, make vague overtures about reconciliation on their terms, and then grow increasingly hostile when I maintained boundaries. This call began differently. "Your father is ill," she said without preamble. "He's had a heart attack." The news landed like a physical blow. Despite everything, despite the abandonment and lies and manipulation, he was still my father. The complicated emotions surprised me. Concern mixed with anger, worry tangled with resentment. Is he okay?" I managed to ask. "He's stable," she said. "It was mild, but a warning sign. The doctors say he needs to reduce stress." I waited for what would come next, knowing from experience that information from my mother always came with an agenda. "He's been asking for you," she said, her voice softening in a way that immediately triggered my suspicion. "I think it would help his recovery if you visited. Put the past behind us." There it was, the manipulation wrapped in concern, using my father's health as leverage to achieve the reconciliation on their terms that they'd been pushing for years. "Has he acknowledged what you both did?" I asked. "Abandoning me, taking my college fund, lying to the family about me." Her voice hardened instantly. "This isn't the time for accusations, Serena. Your father is ill. If you can't put aside your grievances even now, then perhaps you're not the person I thought you were." The familiar guilt trip, the attempt to make me responsible for the relationship breakdown. But I was no longer the vulnerable college student desperate for family approval. "I'm sorry Dad is ill," I said calmly. "I hope he recovers fully, but I won't pretend the past didn't happen to make his recovery more comfortable." "He's your father," she said, voice rising. "After everything we did for you." "Yes, after everything you did, including abandoning me without warning and leaving my possessions in garbage bags. That happened, Mom. Pretending it didn't won't help anyone heal." The call ended as they always did, with my mother hanging up in frustration because I refused to enter the alternate reality where they were loving parents, and I was an ungrateful child. I sat with the news about my father, allowing myself to feel the complex emotions it triggered. Concern for his health, anger that even a heart attack was being used as a manipulation tool, sadness for what our relationship could have been in a healthier family system. Winters, with whom I still had monthly sessions, helped me navigate these feelings. "You can feel compassion for your father's health situation without compromising your boundaries," she reminded me. "One doesn't negate the other." I sent a simple card to my father at the hospital, expressing hopes for his recovery, without engaging in the pretense that our relationship was normal. It was the best I could offer while maintaining my hard-won emotional health. Jake reported later that our father had recovered well, but used the health scare to tighten his control over the family. "He's using it as leverage," Jake observed. "Anytime Mom disagrees with him, he clutches his chest and mentions stress." The pattern continued unbroken. The same dynamics that had characterized our family for decades persisted. The only difference was that I was no longer caught in their web. As my memoir began taking shape, I wrestled with how to portray my parents. It would have been easy to paint them as villains, to focus solely on their cruelty and control. But the reality was more nuanced. They were damaged people who had caused damage in turn. My father, who had been emotionally abandoned by his own father. My mother, raised to value appearances above authenticity. Understanding the origins of their behavior didn't excuse it, but it helped me contextualize my experience within a larger pattern of family dysfunction. It allowed me to see my abandonment not as a reflection of my worth, but as the culmination of generational trauma playing out in dramatic form. This perspective infused my writing with compassion, alongside the rightful anger. It wasn't about forgiveness exactly. I wasn't sure I would ever reach that point, but about understanding the full complexity of human relationships, even those that wound us deeply. As I approached the 3-year mark of my abandonment, I realized how much my definition of family had evolved. Family was no longer determined by blood or legal ties. It was defined by consistent love, by showing up, by supporting without controlling. By these measures, I had a rich and vibrant family surrounding me. Taylor and her parents still included me in holiday celebrations. Mrs. Peterson, though increasingly frail, called weekly to check on me. My colleagues at the publishing house had become a supportive professional family. Jake and I were rebuilding our sibling bond on healthier terms. Even my Aunt Meredith, once a distant figure, had become a steady presence in my life. What I had lost, the conditional love of controlling parents, had made space for these authentic connections to flourish. The empty chairs at my graduation had been filled by people who chose to be there, whose love came without strings attached. The garbage bags on that porch had contained more than discarded belongings. They had contained a painful but valuable truth that sometimes what looks like abandonment is actually liberation. That sometimes the ending of one kind of family makes room for another healthier kind to emerge. On the third anniversary of finding my home empty, I stood in my Brooklyn apartment surrounded by friends gathered for the official launch party of my memoir. The book, titled Garbage Bags on the Porch, A Journey from Abandonment to Belonging, was being published by the very company where I now worked as an editor. As I signed copies for the people who had supported me through this journey, I reflected on the profound truth I had discovered that family isn't something you're given. It's something you build person by person, connection by connection, choice by choice. The abandoned daughter standing shocked on that porch 3 years earlier could never have imagined this moment, could never have foreseen that from those garbage bags would grow a life of purpose, of authentic connection, of hard-won wisdom. Have you ever experienced rejection from those who should have loved you unconditionally? How did you rebuild your sense of belonging afterward? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this video resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience and healing. And if you know someone who might be struggling with family estrangement, share this video as a reminder that abandonment isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's just the beginning of a better one. Thank you for listening, and remember, family is who loves you, not just who's related to you.